Hello everyone, I'm Lynn Langett, and in this next hour we're going to spend some time taking a look at the new BI Semantic Model for SQL Server 2012. I'm doing this webcast on behalf of Developmentor, for whom I contract, and I've written courseware around SQL Server 2008 and SQL Server 2012 for developers around the OLTP stack as well as around the BI stack. So to get started, I'm going to set a little bit of context here and remind you that if you haven't had a chance to take a look, BI is one of the three core areas of improvement in SQL Server 2012. These slides will be available after this webcast, and you can download, and you can see there's a link on the bottom there. So if you want to take some time to take a look at some of the other areas of improvement, for example, mission critical or cloud on your terms, you can get a start through the link. So in terms of BI improvements or breakthrough insights, there are a number of either new or improved features in the product. And you can see in this slide that I have listed out 6 different features. We're going to be focusing today in this hour on only one of these 6 features. I've done a number of other educational presentations around some of these other features. I have a YouTube channel with a number of presentations on data quality services. Been focusing quite a bit on that. I have one video on Power View. Also, again, I've written these classes for Developmentor on really all these things. So I also have a couple references in this slide. But again, we're going to be focusing on the new semantic model for SQL Server analysis services, which is called the BI Semantic Model. So drilling down even a little bit deeper, when we are thinking about implementing a data warehousing solution on SQL Server 2012, we really have to think in terms of 3 different areas in terms of our technology choices. And those would be modeling or data storage, query languages, programmatic access, generating or writing the queries to get the data back that we need from our particular storage location, and then clients, displaying the information. So you can see here from a high level, in 2012, you have some new options. I didn't include the other options. I'll mention them here, but what you see included are new or improved. So in terms of modeling, what we'll be focusing on today is the BI Semantic Model, or the tabular model, which is a new capability in analysis services. Also, we'll take a look at the Power Pivot improvements because, as you'll see they tie together. There is continued to be the availability of the OLAP cubes, or the Unified Dimensional Model, in analysis services, and we'll briefly take a look at those as well. We're focusing more on the new features. In terms of the programmatic or the query access to these newer models, there is some access via the existing multidimensional query language, MDX, but there are some new aspects to languages that were introduced with Power Pivot, the data expression language, or DAX, and that's the query language, and XMLA, which is the structure language, or the DDL language for the models, whether they be tabular or UDM. We'll also talk how column store, new column store indices, feature into programmatic access of these models. And then thirdly, we'll take a little bit of a look at display in terms of displaying in Microsoft clients, which is always a good choice if you're in a Microsoft shop, displaying through Excel, pivot tables, and pivot charts. Also, we'll talk about some of the SharePoint connectivity, and may show you a quick demo, if time allows, of SharePoint Power View. Also, I'll give you some links for programmatic access in case you want to write your own client. And I'll mention some of the other vendors that work with Microsoft, such as Tableau. So at the end of the hour, if I've done my job, you will be comfortable with understanding what, why, who, when, where, how, and anything else about the new BI Semantic Model. It's my goal in an hour to make you ready to go and try it out. So we'll see how I do on that. So in order for us to get started, we need to first understand what part of SQL Server itself we're talking about. So again, we're talking about SQL Server analysis services, which is included with SQL Server in the Standard Edition or greater. There is a new edition in 2012 called the BI Edition, so Standard BI or Enterprise. It is not included in SQL Express. So if you have SQL Express, you will not have the ability to work with these new models. Now within SQL Server Analysis Services, a significant new feature is that you can now install it in one of 3 different modes. So we will be focusing on the center one, which is the BI Semantic Model or the tabular model in this webcast. But again, just for completeness, I will mention some of the other ones. So you can see that I have 3 models listed here. The first is the UDM, which is the multidimensional, the traditional OLAP cubes and data mining models. The second is the BISM, or the tabular model. And the third is yet another way that you can install an instance of analysis services. And this is kind of a confusing name. It's called Power Pivot for SharePoint. What you're actually installing is you're installing analysis services tabular mode on your SharePoint in a box or environment. So you can see at the very bottom, there's a screenshot here. And what I'm showing you is SQL Server Management Studio for SQL Server 2012. And we have 3 different instances. So the yellow cube is the UDM. The blue looks like almost a little window. It has 9 blue squares. That's the tabular model, or the BISM. And then the people, that where it says Analysis Server 11, that is the Power Pivot for SharePoint installation. You'll notice that they're all SQL Server Analysis Services 11, which confusingly is SQL Server 2012. Okay? So I'll take a look now, or I'll show you what this actually looks like in Management Studio. Now, in my particular instance, I do not have a SharePoint instance installed on my laptop, but what I rather have installed here is I have 2 separate named instances of tabular models, so RC0 and RC0 tabular, and I did actually upgrade those to the RTM version. And then I have a 2008 R2 cube, because really there's not significant differences for what we're talking about here. So this is 2008 cube. And then the last one, the one that's highlighted here, is the relational model. So this is the relational model. This one happens to be 2008 as well. We could just as well add the 2012 relational model. And there's the 2012 relational model you can see because it's 11. So I have all these different instances in SQL Server Management Studio, and this is 2012. So if I go here, you can see this is 2012 and this is RTM. We'll come back to this after we understand why you would use the tabular models. This will be part of the how you would work from an administrative point with the different models. But just to give you a quick visual of what it actually looks like in the environment. So what is this thing called the BI Semantic Model, or the tabular model? It's a new model that's hosted on the analysis server, so a server instance. You can, of course, install analysis services on the same server as you install a relational engine or any other component of SQL Server. And oftentimes in testing, that's the way it's done. But in production, most commonly you get a dedicated server for this so that you can manage and monitor the resources, the CPU, the RAM, so on and so forth, separately. It's designed to be complementary to the UDM. It has a different feature set. Very, very important is when you install analysis services, and I've highlighted this here, you can only install it in either tabular or UDM mode. You cannot switch the installation. You cannot, upgrade or change it or whatever. You have to install it in that mode. For those of you who have some familiarity with Power Pivot, and I'm assuming that the audience basically doesn't, which is an add-in to Excel, the model for the BISM, the underlying engine technology, is something called VertiPack, which is a highly optimized, mainly in-memory data store designed for primarily read access, quick read access. This is a technology that Microsoft purchased from a company several years ago and released as Power Pivot, which is an add-in to Excel, which then would use the resources on the particular client machine. The BISM is a version of this, and you'll see there's a high level of compatibility between the client-based models, the Power Pivot workbooks, and the BISM, the server-based models, as we go along. So very important to understand sort of the relationship. So VertiPack is the internal data engine. So you'll read quite a bit about VertiPack when you're taking a look at this. So Why might you want to use this rather than traditional OLAP cubes for creating aggregated, primarily read-only, fast and flexible query stores? And the primary reason to use it is that it is simpler to set up than a traditional OLAP cube. As you'll see when we get into the demos, the step that was prohibitive for many of the BI projects out there, I know certainly ones that I personally worked on, was the ETL step in an OLAP cube building. And that meant creating that intermediate cleansing area, staging area, and holding area in the shape of a star schema that was nearly required to use the UDM. There was some flexibility in the UDM for non-star schema or non-sort of Kimball style source data, but it was rather rigid. So what this, in a practical point, required is that customers had to make duplicate copies of their data, not once but twice, to set up the UDM. And in some cases, that still might be appropriate, but many customers wanted something a little bit more flexible. So the idea with the BISM is that you skip the intermediate step, you connect directly to your source data, and then you benefit from the in-memory optimization of Vertipack so that you get the flexible query model without having that intermediate step. So it's got customers really excited, and I've actually worked with some customers in the pre-release and already now that we're in release, and the adoption has been very fast because the model building time has been exponentially decreased. So one of the reasons that we have the BISM rather than just using Excel Power Pivot is, as this screenshot is designed to indicate, that if you are creating these in-memory models, you are limited by the memory of the machine on which they're running. So if you are creating a large model on a client laptop, you could run out of memory, and that's what this is actually showing. I have my little laptop has just 3 gigs of RAM, and I literally can crash my machine by trying to load massive amounts of data into Power Pivot. Power Pivot, in case you don't know, is only limited by the memory of the client. There is no hard limit, not like Excel. And commonly, when the team showed Power Pivot, they showed 100x in terms of the number of rows. So if it was a million or 10 million, they showed 100 times that in Power Pivot, depending on how much memory they had on the model. So the BISM has the advantage over Power Pivot of that it is limited by the memory on the server and the CPUs and the disks on the server. And it also has some enhancements that are more enterprise-based, like granular level security and the ability to do more granular performance tuning and monitoring. So as you'll see, although they share a common heritage, the BISM is a server-based model. So why use it? Quick and fast to set up, and integrates with Power View. So what does this do? How do you work with it? Basically, you start with this idea of mashing up lots of data and creating dynamic reporting. So in order to understand this, let's go into a demo, and I'm actually going to start with Excel. So inside of Excel, I've got Power Pivot, which is an add-in, and it's important when you grab Power Pivot, which is free, that you get the appropriate edition and version. It's tied to SQL Server, so I'd recommend if you have Excel 2010 that you get the SQL Server 2012 version of Power Pivot because it has some enhancements over the previous version. The other thing to be aware of is you have to get the appropriate version for your edition of Excel, 32-bit or 64-bit. So how Power Pivot lives is literally as an application that runs from within Excel. So you launch it by clicking launch the Power Pivot window, and then it will launch up. And then what you're going to do is pull in data from different locations, and then you're going to display it out in a pivot table. So one of the things I always tell people, if they are new to this paradigm, whether it's the developers or whether it's the end users or the business owners, just from my many years of experience working in data warehousing projects, I will always do a health check on what is the level of understanding of pivot tables. And I will often find that I need to do some training of some of the groups, whether it's the IT professionals or the analysts or something in terms of pivot tables. So that's just sort of a real-world piece of advice. So when you're going to create your Power Pivot workbook, you first need to select your data sources. And for the purposes of simplicity, I'm first going to start with a relational data source. So I'm going to go to SQL Server, and I'm going to say my particular SQL instance, and I'm going to actually take a look and see what I have where. And I'm going to take a look here, and I'll use AdventureWorks LT 2012. I'll use a real small one just to make it load quickly. And this one is going to be, I think this is my local host, so let me just put a dot in there and see if that will come up quick like. And I'll do AdventureWorks LT. Now, if I go into the advanced here, I can set different security criteria. I can specify about the connection string, which obviously would be important in a production situation. I'm not talking too much about security here on the client side in this short webcast, but obviously whenever you have data being passed to a client, you need to have some sort of security plan. So this is designed for a subject matter expert, an analyst, if you will, to retrieve the data out of a system to which they're authorized to connect. Now, you could use tables or views. Again, simplified demonstration here, direct table access. Real world, I probably, as a DBA, give them view access. Or you can write a query, and there's a query writer that looks sort of like the Access Query Writer. I can go in and just select all the tables, or if there are certain tables that I'm not interested in, I can deselect them. If I'm not interested in getting the views, I can deselect those. I can also select related tables. I can also go into a table and I can preview it. And again, designed for the subject matter expert. So if I was uninterested in one of the fields like weight, I could just remove that entire field. And if I was not interested in a portion of discontinued date, I could go and I could say remove anything with blank, and this would write a SQL query basically against the data source. Now, if you had a different type of data source, it would write a different kind of query, and that's one of the beauties of Power Pivot and the BISM. So then I click Finish, and now it's going to load this relatively small data set into memory quickly. And once it does that, then I can display that data and create dynamic reporting. So I say Close. And what you'll see inside of the Power Pivot window is this is displayed as a series of workbook pages, which is obviously familiar for Excel users. However, it's a little bit misleading because if you click through, it does look like workbooks. But this, remember, of course, is a different application running it from within Excel. One of the new enhancements we have in the 2012 edition, which goes through to the BISM, is this diagram view, which shows what we really have here, which is a set of related tables. So unlike traditional Excel, Power Pivot does understand a relational model. And you can see here that we have not only the tabular structures, but we also have the relationships. Now, while this is smart, it's not perfect. And what I mean by that is the only reason there's a relationship automatically created between sales order header and sales order detail is that we have a identically named column. In the real world, of course, we don't always have such nicely modeled data, so we have the ability to add relationships, remove relationships, and make the model more effective by working with the modeling tool. So we can do that this way. We also can add enhancements to the model that are useful when we're doing dynamic reporting. And one of those enhancements is the ability to create a hierarchy of the data. So what we can do is we can just go into the particular data source and we can say, I don't know, cust location or something. I would probably put it in nicer English if I were really doing this. And then what we've done is we then, if we have this information here, which we might not, let's change this name to cust company or something. Some information that we have, custco. So we want to have a hierarchy of this information with the company name, and I'm just dragging it down, and then the salesperson underneath the company name. So this ability to dynamically create hierarchies that don't require any building is significant in terms of improvement in flexibility over a traditional OLAP cube. So once we are done with our model, and we can certainly do lots of other things, we'll look at a couple of things in a minute. One of the ways that an end user could experience this is through a pivot table. Now, if they were sophisticated enough, they could actually just pull this data in like I just did, and then set up their pivot table with, let's see, we got the cities, and let's see if we have anything that's actually related. Sales order detail. Let's look at the unit price here. And then we have a sum of unit price, and then we can do another measure if we want. Just like a traditional pivot table, this just drops in, so it gives you your dynamic reporting. We can say by product name here, and now we get this this subset. Now, if we want to filter that, we can filter this in a different way. We could filter it as a report filter. We could also filter it as a slicer. And then we could do a dynamic query by just clicking on a particular value. And we could then remove the filter if we wanted to. We could also make the slicer horizontal if that was more appealing to us. We could add additional slicers, so we could add another one by color. And we could put that, this is putting this as an aggregate, but we can move it to slicer. So this is, showing the dynamic reporting. If you've never seen this, this gets obviously the business side quite excited because, in many cases they're used to waiting for somebody to write a relational query and tune the relational query. So this ability to have dynamic reporting is, super exciting. So in addition to being able to do this, what is interesting about Power Pivot is you can mash up or add data from disparate sources. So, there's several different use cases. First, you can just pull in your model and have a quick model that you can query. The second thing is you can then enhance that model by pulling other data in. So, sort of the best way to see the breadth of this is to click this little silver button right here. So this shows all the different data sources to which you can connect. And I mean, there really is a plethora of them. Traditional SQL Server, SQL Azure, the SQL Server PDW, Access, Oracle, Teradata, Sybase, Informix, DB2, OLE, DB, another Cube itself. You could pull it off of a Cube. And then the ones that I think are super interesting are an SSRS report. So a use case that I've certainly presented to clients and they've been really excited about is if you have your set of sort of standard relational reports and maybe you don't have a lot of extra dev talent to customize those reports and you have some one-offs and some needs to what if on those reports and things like that. And yeah, you could import the data into Excel, but you could now import the data into Power Pivot, which can overcome some of the limits of Excel and also maintain this idea of relationships between data, which can be easier to work with rather than lookups between worksheets and things like that. Another new trend that is supported both in the Power Pivot and the BISM is external data, data outside your system, and this is Azure Data Market data sets. So you can pull in external data either hosted by Microsoft or just a plain old data feed, and this is OData. So this is a data feed to which you have permission. I'll just show you what it looks like here. You would just put in the data feed URL, and then if you have any connection information, then you pull that data into your model. So let me just pull this up. And then, of course, you can pull in an Excel or another text file. Now, just for the purposes of completion, let's jump out and take a look at the Windows Azure Data Market. This is a trend in sort of data warehousing. In this time of what's called big data, in addition to the data that you might have from your relational system or even some non-relational systems now, some of these sensor systems, whether they're phones or devices or whatever, in addition to that, what companies are starting to use competitively is third-party data. So data that they either buy or rent or try out, and they get it from places like the Windows Azure Data Market. There are other public data sets. I know a lot of governments I've been working with. New York City has got a lot of data. I was just up in Vancouver, British Columbia last week. They're doing some open data as well. In addition, I work with some other data sites like InfoChimps is another one. In any case, you generally sign up with some kind of ID, which I've done here, and that's free. And then you peruse the data sets that are available. So in this case, this is lawyers.com legal articles. So this is public data. So if I wanted to then work with this public data to see if, oh, I don't know, for my use case here might be to look up if any of my customer names were mentioned in any of these legal articles, which I know is a little bit of a stretch, but gives you something. So you scroll down here and you can explore this data set. You can pull it into Power Pivot. You can use Tableau, which is the third-party vendor, a little bit more options in terms of display, or you can programmatically access it. So I generally say that when you start, you want to just explore it. And what you're trying to build is the service root URL here and this URL for the query, because that's what you're going to paste into your Power Pivot window. So when you first start, just basically click to see what you get. And this has articles and areas of law. So if you then wanted to visualize what this looks like, you can just click here, and then you can say, oh, give me a bar chart, and I'm going to have article ID, and I don't even know if this is going to look meaningful, but it gives you some idea of what the data might look like. Okay, so how many articles per each GUID, not super interesting. There you can put it in XML, and then if you want to export it, you can just export it out. Notice you can export to Power Pivot here. So if you click download, that's going to put it right into Power Pivot. And there's your download, and notice it's an ATOM SVC, so an Atom SVC. And then if you click that, it says create a new workbook or put it in your workbook and say OK. And then it says, oh, you're already trying to import, so you can't import two things at once, so don't do that. Let me go back to the web here. I may have to download it and try and import it again. My bad. And then try and put it in, see if that works. And notice now you have the data query name. You have this query. Now I do need another thing, which is the account key. So my account key is going to come from my site, and then I would click that, and then that information would come through, and it would be added to my model. Now, one of the things about this that is important for us to understand is when we're creating these models, they're intelligent, but they're not perfect. And what do I mean by that? So if I, for the purposes of time, just add in another customer table from just regular AdventureWorks here that doesn't have any relationships. Let's see, I'll just add like employee. I'll select the related tables, and then that's probably good enough, employee and person, and say finish. So now what I'm doing is I'm adding a subset. I'm mashing up data. I'm adding a subset of other data in. So this is where we as data professionals come in, because yes, you can mash it up, but how often is it that keys are the same and columns are the same? It's not really the case. So we're going to have to go in there and tweak the model. This becomes the new world of model building. It's not so much cleansing the data, it's determining whether there are relationships and how we want to look at this. So this is pulling in the information. So now, once we've got this, we click close, and it's taking a little bit longer because the model is loading into memory on my little laptop here. And you can see that if I make this model smaller, there should be a set of unrelated. See over here on the right side? This is the second part, and this is the first part. These things are unrelated. So if I wanted to do a pivot table on this stuff, now notice it says that the Power Pivot data was modified, and I want to click refresh. Say cancel. And I want to refresh, and it's going to now give me all the stuff. But if I wanted to take the employees, and again, this is just a clearly bogus scenario, and I wanted to put, I don't know, the gender or something on here, then we're going to have the name and the gender. That has some sort of relationship that it could find. But notice on the right here, relationship may be needed, because it's trying to guess now between these two data sets what's the relationship. And obviously we have to verify this kind of stuff. So we can say create, and then it's trying to guess. And it might say, well, I can find them or I can't find them. So this is part of the enhancement that we're going to have to do when we build models, whether we build them for Excel or whether we build them for the BISM. And here it says, no, they didn't find any, so you're going to have to do this. So, all right, so it's good, but it's not, it doesn't eliminate us is really kind of the key takeaway here. So what's interesting about it is you can mash up all this data, but we're going to have to provide the data probably in views or something in some way that is useful if we are not creating the model. Now there's really two aspects to this. Either we will be creating the model, and I'll show you in a minute how to do it in the developer tools, or our subject matter experts will be creating the model. Now again, this is a really big paradigm shift, because in the past, the database professionals created the models based on the requirements. Why the subject matter experts might be involved in creating the models is because there might be so much data that it's just impractical for somebody who is not a domain expert to take that data and create the model. So it becomes a more iterative and a more collaborative process in working with BISM. So this just shows some of those other third-party data markets. So when to use the BISM. Now you have some idea of what it looks like, at least in the client version. You haven't really seen the server version yet, which I'll show you in a minute. The way I see this thing, the way I've launched it, is I usually start it on the client side with the subject matter experts, because those are the people who are driving the reporting and the data warehousing requirements. So the analysts, sometimes it's the IT department, sometimes it's the C-level executives. So commonly what I'll do is I'll do a presentation and I'll show them just plain old pivot tables, and then I'll show them Power Pivot with some of their own data so they can at least get the idea of dynamic reporting. Now if they've done it before, then I might pull in some third-party data and mash it up together as a demo and then let them work with it a little bit so that they can get more used to it. Another department that really seems to grasp onto this is the marketing departments, because they love this idea that they can pull in third-party demographic demo and help make better use of their marketing dollars. Then what I usually do, because I'm a consultant and I don't have a full-time gig at this point, is I leave and I come back in a month or a couple months and I check in on them, and then what usually happens is they've said, oh, I like this and I'd like to share some of my Excel workbooks with Power Pivot with some other people on my team. What's the best way to do that? Well, then we really have two choices. Once they've sort of embraced the paradigm of dynamic reporting and kind of understood. And the first choice would be to, if they are a Microsoft shop and they already have SharePoint, because I certainly wouldn't advise buying SharePoint for this reason, but if they have it, they could possibly host these workbooks up on SharePoint. Now I'm kind of hesitant to do that because that puts a lot of load on SharePoint, because of course this stuff loads into memory. So personally, although it is an option, this is not something I've actually done with any clients. Clients that are wanting to create this shared environment, I'm encouraging them to get a separate server and a separate license for analysis services, because I think that it's a more controllable and a more maintainable way to move from personal BI to team or corporate BI. So I tend to skip the middle one. If you were to do it, I have links and information on how to set it up. I will tell you that the setup of setting up Power Pivot on SharePoint is daunting. I was at an invited event at the Microsoft campus with a bunch of MVPs, and I'll tell you that half the people in the room couldn't set it up on the first try because it's that complicated. It's just a lot of steps and not good feedback of fail. So if you are going to set it up, get all the instructions from MSDN. I have the links in the deck, and take your time. I'd prefer, though, if you're going to go to the next level, that you actually do what I'm going to show you next, which is install analysis services on a server in tabular mode and start working with these models. So there are a couple different ways to work with the models. You can either take what your SMEs, your subject matter experts, created personally, and you can import them and then enhance them even further, or you can start from scratch. So you can do either way, and I'm going to demonstrate both in just a minute here. So as I said, you have to install the product first, the server, and that's where the models will be hosted. Now you can create the models in a number of different places, but we're going to now move to the developer side, where we're going to create the models using SQL Server Data Tools. SQL Server Data Tools is the replacement for the Business Intelligence Development Studio, both of which are add-ins to Visual Studio. So there is no more BIDS in 2012, it's SSDT. SSDT, like BIDS, is a standalone product. So if you do not have Visual Studio, you can just install SSDT, which is a free download, and I have the link on this slide, and then you can work with that. Be sure to get the correct version and edition. Notice the slide here, I have CTP4. That is no longer valid. You would want to have RTM. If you have Visual Studio, it will be installed inside Visual Studio 2010 with SP1 or greater as an install. So we'll come back to that in just a minute, and I'll make a model in the server. Once you've made your model, then you need to host your model. So you can host your model either back in Excel, depending if they have enough memory, and we'll talk about some limits around that in a minute here, or you can host your model in SharePoint. So to be clear, SharePoint has a couple different functionalities. SharePoint can render the model, in other words, pull the data, render it, and I should say SharePoint can query and pull the results of the query and render on SharePoint, or it can connect to an analysis server which will do the query on the analysis server, return the data, and then be rendered on SharePoint. So that would be preferred to me, the second one. So if you were going to render on SharePoint, then you see here you would create a new type of connection, which is called a BISM connection. And what that then does is that makes the source BISM model, which is the model hosted on the server, available on SharePoint for rendering. Now, if you don't have SharePoint, then you would either use probably Excel or some type of custom client, whether you buy it, like Tableau or something, or you write it yourself, you code it yourself. All right, let's see how to work with models on the server. So to do that, I'm going to open up SQL Server Developer Tools. SQL Server Data Tools, I'm sorry, SQL Server Data Tools, keep changing the name. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Excel while this is opening, and I'm going to save this model. And you can see it's going slow because of the memory needed to do this. So I'm going to try to save this. Save. There we go. And I'm going to save this out onto the desktop as just book one. That's fine. And that way I can close it. And now I'm going to close Excel. And that's going to speed up my computer a little bit. So now I'm in Visual Studio, and I'm going to go ahead and say File, New, Project. And because I have SSDT here, I have the BI templates. So in the BI templates, under Analysis Services, I have 5 options. I can work with the UDM. Now, to be clear on this, what is happening on this side is you are creating the model or the structure. In order to then work with this outside of building it, like for a client to access it, you'd have to host it on an instance of Analysis Service. You have to deploy it, which could be the same machine as your DevTools or maybe not. So in other words, to work with Analysis Services cubes, I would have to have a UDM instance in 2012, which I do not have on this machine. So I could make them, but I couldn't deploy them. The other option here is to work with my BSMs or tabular projects, so I can create a new one, or I can import it from Power Pivot, or I can import it from an existing server. So let's start with making a new one. And what this is going to give me is this model BIM file. And what I need to do is going to look remarkably like what I did in Power Pivot, because remember, it's basically the same technology, just hosted on a server. So inside of here, I have nothing right now, so I'm going to go to this Model menu, and then I have the ability to import from a data source, and it's the same menu. So I go through here, do the same process, and I will pull in my same small, and I'm pulling in the small one just because it's quick. Pull this in. Now, one thing to notice here is I have a credential box now because I have the ability to pass in other credentials. When I was working in Excel, I was just passing my Windows credentials, which is probably okay for that scenario. But as I said, in the server scenario, you probably want more sophisticated security. So you can specify either a service account or some other type of credentials to connect back to the source data. So this is pulling this all in. And it's going to be really an identical process here. So again, this is the iterative part I was talking about. If you are working with data that you're unfamiliar with, a tip I have is to, if you have somebody so inclined, have the analyst start this thing in Power Pivot and then just import that. And you'll see, same thing. You've got the different, tabular instances here, and you have the ability to do the diagram. So once the diagram loads, then you can do the same thing. You can, add. Let's see what we'll do a different hierarchy here. You can add a hierarchy inside for navigation, and I can say I'm doing a hierarchy and address here. Now, one thing that I did not show, I can say location or something, and then I can say first I'm going to do country, region, and you can see it's going a bit slower here because I have more things open on my machine. I need to shut down some things. So I can drag country, region down. This is going to create a navigational hierarchy that's going to show up in client tools like Excel. And I can go state, region, and I can go city. This is a dynamic hierarchy. Now, if I switch back to my grid view, I can also work with my measures. Now, just like in Excel, I can add a column here. But if I add a column value, what is different is in addition to the Excel functions like sum, I have these functions that are DAX, because DAX is an extension language to the Excel language. So if I pull this up, I have this notion of tables. So that means the tables, each workbook page is basically a table. So then I could put in a different table, and if I do let's see, if I say, if I list the table, you can see that I get IntelliSense that lists the table and the column name. So then this basically will do a calculated column, but I have the ability to use the DAX language rather than like an Excel lookup language. The other thing that I can do is if I go into a numeric value, this bottom area here is called the calculation area. And what I can do is I can create a calculated value inside of here. So if I say sum or equals average, I'll just do average, simple. Notice I have different types of averages, again, because of DAX. And I just need the column name. So I say line total, but that's not going to actually work because it doesn't know which page it's on or which workbook page. So sales order detail, line total. And then I say this, and then that is going to, once I click off of that, it creates a measure. So this is a calculated measure. Now you can do this two ways. You can do it in here and make it persistent in the model, or you can do it inside the Excel client. Now, one of the reasons why you'd want to do it in here is because everybody's using this measure. And again, I did something, super easy, but obviously for financial analytics, you can use a lot more sophisticated formulas. Common things are time-based periodicity, like what is the value, the average value of this period to date over last period to date. And there's a whole bunch of functions that are included that help you with that. Another reason why you might want to do this is once you have a measure, then this little button becomes highlighted, and this is your key performance indicator button. And you can then take this measure and you can make it into a key performance indicator. So what that does, and I'll just put an absolute value in here, is basically it's the value of 1, which is green, or 0, which is yellow, or -1. And you set the threshold for the different values, and then this comes through using the icon set you choose to many clients, mostly Microsoft clients that support this. So they can then see this as a dashboard, basically. So that, and then that makes it into a KPI. And then you have a KPI. So that's a couple of enhancements, and that shows that it's a KPI down here. So once you are done, pulling in, mashing up, making your hierarchies, adding your DAX, then what you can do is you can take a look at what this looks like. You can analyze it in Excel, which will pull it back into a regular pivot table. Again, this iterative process. When you're ready to deploy this thing, you can process it. Now, when you process it, you're saving the metadata, which is the XMLA, that's the structure, and then you're saving a version of the data. Because this can be a really large structure, because remember it's server-based, kind of like OLAP cube partitions, you can process a particular table, a particular partition, and obviously there's a one-time process when you develop, and then there's an ongoing process for the updates. In addition, you can create perspectives, which are basically views. So you can say, all right, I want a subset for a particular client. Again, this is reflecting that this is a server-based product. You can also set roles, which is you can add the permissions for a particular a role, and it's very granular. You notice down here you can put a DAX filter, so you can say what the permissions are. You can say read, read and process, process, administrator. Again, the client obviously is most people are going to be reading. Only junior administrators or administrators will be doing updates through processing. And again, it can be very granular. So you add the different members, and I'll just add myself here so you can see what this looks like. And then you can add row filters at the level of DAX. So much more granular security. Also, there's a couple of tools that I use when I work with server-based models. These come from Codeplex, and they're referenced in my slide deck. One of the tools is the ability to create a DAX file for the model. So since I have a really simple model here, let me just save this. And then I will go to the model and say create DAX file. So this is an add-in. This doesn't come with SSDT. But the reason that you would want this is because unless you're super fluent in DAX, it gives you IntelliSense over here for this DAX model. So you can see that this is the calculated measure that we added. That will show up, and then there's the KPI that we added. So again, if you're doing this, full-time or something, you're probably going to want to become fluent in DAX. But if it's a part-time thing, it can just save you money. Save you money via time, basically, because it'll be faster for you to check or copy or use these DAX expressions that you're writing over here. Another tool that I use with these models that I got from Codeplex that is really helpful is this compare BISM models. And what this does is this compares, any two models that you might have, whether it's a project or in a deployed database, and it has some options to it, include perspectives, roles, so on and so forth. And then I think this should work. We'll see if I can run. Needs to close the file. Okay. And then and so it's the BISM normalizer. Yeah. So this must be empty, because basically it shows you by the level of object what's different. So here's the relationships, here's the tables, and then it allows you to work with them. So here's the KPI, for example, we created. So how I use this is, again, this iterative process where I work with these subject matter experts, and they will create their version of a BISM in Power Pivot, and then when they're ready, I will pull that in, maybe make a save point, work on it, and then I can do a comparison and just show them the things that I've added or changed. So I really like this tool. It's really helpful. Let's see. So if we go out of here, we open the model again. A couple other things. Notice the menus will change when the model opens. So you can see if I click on the model, see I get model, table, create relationships, manage relationships, show measure grid. That's the bottom thing there. Okay. For the date, I can mark something as a date table, and that's needed for particular DAX functions. I can set partitions if tables are huge, again, so server-based, so management. So I go in and I could say create a partition based on a certain value. So this is really identical to the UDM. It allows you to partition. Again, things available on the server. Table properties are allow you to take a look at the underlying query if you want to make a change to the query to optimize the source query. Again, all these optimizations are really our world once we understand the basic model. We can do optimizations around retrieval and processing and security. We can go all the way down to the level of a column here if we want to work on that as well. Then the other area I want to show you is if I right-click over here on the project, build just validates the XML. Okay, rebuild will do that. Clean gets rid of dependencies. Now if I go to deploy, this won't deploy properly, and I'll show you why. So it's going to save the model, basically because the target is not correct. It should fail, I think, unless I've changed the target. It has to, yeah. So first of all, I have to put in the credentials, and what it's doing now is it's validating the XMLA, the structure, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a sec. and then it's saving the data in the format. Oh, I guess it was right. Okay, so we'll have to go look at, if I go to the properties here, oh, I did change it. So this is the server that it's being deployed to. By default, this is just the default instance. I have it on a named instance, so it would fail normally. So this is the cube. Okay, this is the impersonation. Now this is actually really important. It's a little small setting, but it's really important. This is the query mode. The default is in memory, that everything's in memory. But like I was showing, starting with the client, you can obviously max out the memory. So there are some settings that you can set on the server that I'll show you in a minute to manage the memory. Obviously, there's some ways you can monitor on an ongoing basis. But what's neat about this is we have some flexibility now, where we can say for our particular model, because it's huge or something, that we don't want to just always do in memory. We have 4 options. We can do direct query, which means that it goes directly against the data source. Now, in the case of SQL Server 2012, it's going to use column store indices, which are make the source tables read-only, which is really important for you to understand. We don't really have time to go into it in huge detail, but know that, and also know that some of the DAX will not work because it's going back to the relational engine. So I have some notes on this. There should be a very good business reason to go to this. It shouldn't just be, well, I'm just going to take all the data and it doesn't fit. Just like any data solution, smaller is better. And sometimes if you can, for example, make views against the relational sources to reduce the amount of input data and then leave it in memory, that's going to be a lot better. Now, I've only played with direct query and in memory. I haven't played with, in any kind of production, the variants, direct query first or in memory first. I've read some white papers about it, but haven't played with it. Just want you to know that it's there. All right, so let's go back to slides. So we looked at the parts of the BISM, the tabular model project in SSDT, new or import. We looked at BISM new or from Excel. We looked at the workspace database. We looked at views, the data calculation diagram, so on and so forth. I think I have a lot of these here. So I looked at enhancing by, I didn't talk about sorting or filtering. You can do that by just clicking on the little drop-down arrow here. I showed you add relationship. I showed you add hierarchy. I showed you add a calculated column. I showed you add a measure. So these are all things that we can do as data professionals to make the models more useful when they're on the server. There's the relationship view. I showed you how to add a hierarchy. I didn't show you that it comes from the client. It does come all the way through in the client. There's DAX. Now what I will show you, and let me just close this one, and I'll load this, is there is some good samples out there. So this AdventureWorks DW tabular sample, I'll open it and show it to you. And if you're inspired to go try this out, this is on Codeplex, and I'll come back to it. It has a bunch of DAX in it. So DAX is not that difficult if you've done, Excel formulas. If you've done MDX, it's easy because it's simpler than MDX. It'll take, a week or so to get your head around it, but it's pretty easy. And there's some tutorial in this model. So let me see if I can. Did it open already? Still loading? That's still loading. Okay. This one takes a minute to load. All right. So the BISM models can be created in Excel or imported. I didn't do that use case, but that's something I actually do with clients quite a bit. They can be viewed in Excel while modeling. That's that little button I have highlighted. That'll be a regular pivot table, not a power pivot table. Let's see how this thing is. Okay, good. All right, so this model, this model is much more sophisticated. This has full AdventureWorks, so this one tends to go a bit slower. But you can see a lot of the calculations here. Like I'm on one page that has 60,000 records. There's really hundreds of thousands of records here. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate the DAX for this. You can see it. Oops. It already exists. Okay, well, I need to see the DAX. Calculation, I may have to show all. There it is. Okay, so there's my DAX model. While this is coming up, I'll go back to slides. Oh, there. You can see on the right, in case you don't know what this thing is, this is from the Visual Studio Power Tools. Look at all the DAX in this guy. And there's a really good tutorial on Codeplex that basically talks about, and it has samples of the most common DAX calculations. So I found this one to be really, really useful. So again, the tool I use is the DAX language tool, and this is a sample from CodePlex. So, all right, so we talked about that. One thing I didn't show you is both in Power Pivot, there's an advanced view, and in the model, if you go to the table, I didn't show you quite all these things. I showed you perspectives. Some of the new clients that Microsoft has, most notably this thing called Power View, which only is available through SharePoint, it's a Silverlight client. It allows you to set implicit measures, a default field set, and image URLs, and it works with some of the controls. So if that's your scenario, you want to look at this advanced view on your model. And here's some more on the advanced view. You can set the table behavior, default image, so on and so forth. I did mention this query modes, which is really interesting, only on the server version, not on Power Pivot. And you're going to go by default with direct query. If you use, I'm sorry, by default in memory, what I meant to say. If you use direct query, then make sure you read the docs, because notice I put some of the highlights there. Direct query can use the column star indices, of course makes underlying tables read-only. It supports a single data source, and not all the DAX functions work. And this is your server settings. Let me jump over here to the server to kind of round this out. So now we have our various models, and we did deploy that new model here to RC1. So I think we called it Tabular Project 1. So on SSMS, what can you do with this thing? Well, you can work with the connections, right? And you can then work with the tables, and you can right-click and say, all right, process the table or partition. And I think that if I right-click here, I can script this thing as create, and that's going to show us the XMLA. So again, this is from an administrative standpoint more than from a developer standpoint, but I like to be complete. So like for backups and stuff like that. This will take a minute to script because it's got to script all these different structures. So again, it's like the UDM in that you process the data, which causes the proprietary format, the data to be stored, and then you script the structure. And like the UDM, they're both XMLA. So I'll come back to this. All right, and the server settings there, you set the memory limit. So you right-click on the tabular instance and set that. I did show you the security roles. I did show you the deployment, the default being in memory. And I'm just showing you right now connecting. Now, obviously, from an administrative point, you really don't do anything other than process or script. Let me go back, see if that's done. No, it's still not done. Okay. And then a thing for you to be concerned about with BISM is if you're going to use direct query, are you going to use any sort of MDX? I'm one of the few people I know that have actually taught MDX. It's not an easy language. So important for you to think about that. If you're in SSMS, it's really sort of weird. You can see MDX against a BISM, but they also give you the connect in Excel, which makes more sense to me because it sort of acts weirdly. So tips, tricks, and gotchas. Installation, make sure that you install the correct mode. For development, one BISM model per project. Usually use DAX and then trying it out back and forth. That's sort of my big, huge tip, being iterative. Let's see if this is finished. Now it's going to sit there. Okay. Now it's really going to sit there. Well, it must be almost done. So while this is coming up, let me just bring this up. Like I said, if you're inclined to give this a try, there's a good tutorial that you can start with, CodePlex samples. I showed you some of my tools that I use, the BISM normalizer and the DAX tool. Here's a slide about monitoring resource usage. You can actually use SQL Profiler. You can use Extended Events, and I have a link to the MSDN library. There's some DMVs, and this should be only 2 S's, SSAS, Operations Guide. And UDM, maybe. I'm not really recommending it for very many clients. I'm starting with the tabular model, much simpler, easier to manage. Here's a chart which compares the features of the UDM, which is multidimensional, to the tabular. So if there are certain aspects of data warehousing that you absolutely need, such as actions or custom roll-ups, then you will have to use a UDM. That goes a little bit beyond the scope of what I can talk about in an hour, though. There's a team blog that you can look at here, And there's an MVP blog on DAX. Let me see if this ever got done. Nope, no, it really didn't get done. Okay, and what I hope that I've inspired you to do in this hour is to try it out. So install it. You can put it on one box if need be. Learn Power Pivot and DAX and build a tabular model. So to wind things up, I'm going to just mention another thing that I do in addition to working in the world of data. I'm the co-founder of a non-profit to teach children ages 10 and up to code, and all of our work is available free. It's online. We have now added Java in addition to Small Basic. It's called Teaching Kids Programming, so check it out. So finishing right on time, I will wrap it up with here's my contact information. I'm doing quite a bit of public education around the world of data, whether it be relational, multidimensional, NoSQL, big data. I'm really focusing on all things data. So if you want to stay in contact with me, then follow me on Twitter at Lynn Langit, RSS my blog, or engage me as a contractor either to train your staff or to help you to build your next solution. So I appreciate your time, and I'll stay on the line for questions at this time. And I thank you for your attention, and good luck with your data projects. Thank you very much. Well, there doesn't appear to be any questions, so thanks again for your attention. And again, hopefully you have great success with your data projects. Thanks again. Take care.